Think different. The phrase that Steve Jobs loved to live by and has led to the evolution of today's technology. Starting as a small company in the garage of a Palo Alto home, Apple Inc. has transformed the technology industry and pushed the boundaries of what we thought was possible. For example, in 2007, Dalrymple stated that AT&T has said more iPhones were sold in the first weekend than they had sold in the first month of any other wireless device in the entire history. Think of that impact that it has on the rest of the world, and it doesn't even seem to be diminishing. All of this is thanks to the ingenuity and creative genius of a college dropout named Steve Jobs. Almost everybody I know has a Apple product. I remember my first Apple product. It was a mini blue iPod, and I couldn't wait to use it. Whether it be a cell phone, an MP3 player, a laptop, or a tablet, Apple Inc. has transformed the technology industry to let it be accessible to the consumer. This is all to the thanks of Steve Jobs' motivation to think outside the box and press forward while being an innovator, a visionary, and a motivator. So let's first analyze how Steve was an innovator for technology. Steve was known for being a great innovator. Jeffrey Katzenberg, chairman and CEO of DreamWorks, who worked with Jobs with Pixar, described Jobs as the Thomas Edison of our time. In a way, Edison affected so many businesses, so did Steve Jobs. This just shows how much of an impact Jobs has had on the technology industry. Starting with the Apple II, Steve and Apple Company developed thousands of hardware and software innovations that have changed the future. For example, the Gorilla Glass that's on most of smartphones was developed by Steve Jobs. Although not all of his projects turned out to be successful stories, Steve used this knowledge to push forward and think different, a motto that not only Apple chose to live by, but as well as Steve Jobs. Steve may no longer be around to manage Apple, says avid Apple user Segan, but we only now are starting to enter the post-Jobs era. Because product cycles are long and new Apple gadgets that are being produced, Jobs has a hand on most of the creations that are going to be coming out in the next 6 months. This speaks to the impact that Jobs has had. So now let's transition into how Steve Jobs was a visionary. In failure, you find success, and that is what Steve Jobs found whenever he was temporarily fired from Apple earlier on in his career. He said that he wanted to go back because the world would be a better place with Apple in it, said John Lasseter, a close friend of Steve Jobs. He knew that his products and technology could improve people's lives. He was so passionate about people and technology. His vision was simple. One article stated how he was able to do everything will be studied for years to come. But perhaps the simplest explanation came from his Apple slogan, "Think different." Finally, Steve left this world as a motivator, encouraging others to follow his example. Having received his cancer diagnosis, Steve wanted to make sure that everybody was motivated to think different. Wilson quotes in a commencement speech Jobs addressed, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Have the courage to follow your own heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary." Steve always wanted to make sure that he was not only motivating his company, but motivating those around him. One admirer addresses that Apple has lost a visionary, a creative genius, and the world has lost an amazing human being. Those of us who had been fortunate enough to know and work with Steve have lost a dear friend and an inspiring mentor. Steve leaves behind a company that only he could have built, and his spirit will be the foundation of Apple. Let's not forget the legacy that Steve has left upon this earth. In conclusion, I want to remind you of the 3 things of the legacy of Steve Jobs. He was first an innovator, a visionary, and lastly, a motivator. We will never truly know the impact Steve has left. However, the legacy he has left for his company has given them the charge to impact the world with Jobs' vision. If anything, it has challenged the next generation to do one thing: think different.